right. Will you pray with me, please? Holy One, may these words be a blessing to those who hear them. In your own name, amen. So Jesus' parable about this family focuses on that dynamic between two sons and their father. Now, it's usually called after the younger son, the prodigal son. Prodigal means spending a lot, or being generous and throwing money around. Many artists used it to examine forgiveness and families and the use of money, among other themes. And it's been analyzed allegorically too, the father being a symbol of God, who gives us so much, which is then wasted by God's foolish son, that would be us humans, who then return unexpectedly and are forgiven. Now, unfortunately, that allegorical reading has led to another step, which is that the older brother represents the Jewish people. And so that's an allegory that I step away from, because it's not a reading that we can sustain today. Like so many parables and stories in both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, it's more about the reversal. The expected is that the oldest son is the winner, so to speak, and as with Moses and Aaron, or Jacob and Esau and David and all of his brothers. David was the youngest of his brothers. It's more about God's blessing on those who are often denied it. So it's more about reversal. But early Christians, in separating from the synagogue, remember they were originally Jewish, and so they were separating from the synagogue and leaving the Jewish tradition, they seized on this older brother, younger brother tradition as an allegory of their own journey in faith. And it became embedded in much early Christian theology, and unfortunately remains with us in some forms today. But it's an inaccurate reading. The younger brother should not be read as Christianity and the older brother as Judaism. So we will step aside from that and move on. I just wanted to make sure that we were aware of that strain, and that we know why we don't go there. So each one of these major characters goes through a change, as in all good stories. The younger brother demonstrates that he is indeed quite young. He throws away all of his money, his inheritance, on insubstantial things, leaving him destitute. Now, we don't know what the things were actually that he spent his money on, in spite of what the older son says later about sex workers. It just says wild living, right? Which covers a whole lot of things, depending on who's listening and who's speaking. Gambling it all away, drinking too much, maybe sex workers, or maybe he spent it on an extravagant hobby, like exotic plants or rare texts or fine clothes. Maybe he was a clothes horse, right? Spent all his money at Abercrombie and Fitch. We don't know, and it doesn't really matter, because the point is that he spent everything he had. He spent all of his resources on short-term happiness. When he realizes what he's done, comes to his senses is the translation, but the Hebrew actually means, or the Greek, actually means come to himself. He's overwhelmed with guilt and shame. He's better than this. He knows he is, and that he knows that he has not, as the therapists say, lived out of his best self, right? And he knows only one place to go, and that's back home. Now, it seems like his plan is just to go quietly home and sort of sneak in the back way and say, "Hey, Dad, can you hire me back? I need something, anything to keep a roof over his head and food on his table." He doesn't seem to even think about asking for another gift or another grant, right? He knows he's screwed up, and here is something crucial. He's willing to take the consequences. He's not asking for another chance. He's not asking to be reinstated, right? He's asking for help. and he's willing to take those consequences of having messed up. Now, his brother, who is the dutiful oldest brother, and aren't oldest siblings often the ones who are just what they're supposed to be, obedient, and they get good grades, they excel in some activity, cheerleading, or yearbook, or a sport, or drama, and are generally the ones parents lean on and are proud of. Not that they aren't proud of their other kids. I mean, I'm the one of fourth, I'm the fourth of fifth, so I know that a fourth of 5 kids, so I know that my parents were just as proud of me as they were of my other siblings, but there's something about the oldest. Am I not right? Those of you who are oldest don't need to respond, but I can imagine that it gets tiring too, being the oldest, being the responsible child, the one who always is obedient, the one who also got their inheritance notice. It wasn't just the younger brother. The father split the inheritance, so they both had the inheritance. The one who barely gets noticed sometimes because he's not doing anything wrong, right? He's always there, doing what he's supposed to be doing. So I sort of sympathize with the older brother too. He's done so much for so many years and never was even offered a party to celebrate with his friends. But little brother comes home and in shame, and he gets this big celebration and new clothes and jewelry, and wait a minute, right? And then there's the parent. Now, some people will tell you that it was unheard of to ask for an inheritance ahead of time, that it was like saying the son wished the father were dead, and so it was an insult. Now, I said it myself, but it's actually kind of an overdramatic reading. I mean, sort of, yeah, kind of, but, you know, it's also happened for various reasons. Sometimes the child wanted to start a business, or purchase a farm, or extra land, or something like that. And the same sort of thing happens today, right? A parent helps a child with a down payment on a house, right? And then subtracts that from whatever they were going to be getting from life insurance or whatever else. Or maybe a child has to come home and live with the family for a while due to various circumstances. And the same thing sort of happens. So the father's really trying to help his son move on with his life. So it's not really an insult. So he's doing the dad thing, right? And then he doesn't hear from him at all. I can only imagine the fear and grief he must be feeling, waiting for some kind of message from his son, which never comes. It's scary to send a child out into the world, whether it's the first day of school or the first day of college or anything else. But to not hear how they're doing must be incredibly difficult. And so then that the father's looking out and he sees him coming, and here he comes, and he's still alive. Not only is he still alive, he's coming home. And that's really all Dad cares about at this point, right? Notice the reading says, while he was still a long way off, the father saw his son. So the father was watching, waiting, and hoping that his child would come home. And before his son can even offer his apologies and confess his errors, the father is hugging and kissing him, welcoming him home. And when his older son complains, the father doesn't scold him either. He explains why he has been so generous. The mere fact of the younger brother still being alive is enough for him, for the father. Yes, younger brother is ashamed of his errors and confessed as much and wanted to only be a servant. He's not expecting to be received back as a son. But the father wants much more than that. He wants that son back in the family, home, safe, and secure. The younger son has been forgiven. His errors are not mentioned by the father, and when the older son brings them up, the father ignores them again. We all have friends like that. At least I do. I hope you do. That when we apologize to them, they say they don't even remember the event that you're apologizing for. Or they respond to whatever else you say, ignoring whatever it was that you may have done wrong. They aren't ignoring the apology because they're still upset and not accepting it. They won't acknowledge that there was a need for forgiveness in the first place. You've always been in their good graces, no apology needed. That is indeed grace. And yet the younger son does ask for forgiveness. He acknowledges his error, and I want to emphasize that. I'm willing to bet he messes up a few more times in his life because he's human, but I'm also pretty sure that it's only a time or two, and it's not something as huge as this. He was without hope until his father saw him far away and ran to meet him, joyful at his return in whatever condition. So that older son, the big brother, do you think he could come to forgive his brother? The father did, the one who would have been most offended by the disgrace of the younger son's return. And with that example in front of him, I'd like to think that the older brother could forgive his brother. But that's not really the point of the parable. What Jesus is trying to say, I think, is that no matter how degraded or disgraced we feel, we should ask for forgiveness. No matter how much a person has wronged us, we should forgive them. Errors aren't to be ignored, of course, especially when they hurt people, but we can set them aside in favor of loving and lifting up. We are all a part of the human family, and our connection, our community, means that we ask forgiveness when we've hurt others, and that we forgive when we are asked to do so. We give and take apologies. We give and take forgiveness. Now, it all goes so well in parables, doesn't it? All the characters play their roles, and it ends up in love and grace. But the real world is a bit messier, right? Sometimes we're too proud or angry to say we're sorry, or someone else refuses to admit that they were wrong. Sometimes we've been hurt so badly we can't find a way to forgive. The pain is too deep. And sometimes we've hurt someone in a way that they can't forgive. No one can promise perfect endings. All we can do is the best we can do, and to keep on keeping on and trying to say that we are sorry, doing the best that we can. It means finding ways to say that we're sorry, even when the shame is burning us, or to forgive, even when we think we will never stop hurting. To do otherwise keeps us from real peace. We're still tied up with that shame and anger and guilt and hurt. Let go of that luggage. It can be difficult, but forgiveness is a blessing to both the forgiven and the forgiver. Give an apology. Take forgiveness. Take an I'm sorry. Give forgiveness. In all God's names, amen.